recording kind of late at night, so that's why I'm talking softly. But doing another dungeon workshop video. This one's about character slash NPC creation, and specifically how a PowerPoint from my psych class in college I just wanted to bring over and draw some parallels, and hopefully it can be some useful information. This is a core class. I'm a college student, and this is not my major or anything, so don't expect my level of knowledge to be that great. But this one chapter was about personality, and I found it very useful for D&D. I'm gonna skip around a little bit because we don't need to look at all of the slides, but um, I'm having it here on the opening one of the opening slides because it's defining personality, a distinctive and relatively stable pattern of behaviors, thoughts, motives, and emotions that characterizes an individual. Uh, that's a good definition. But what I want to focus in on for this one is um, behaviors, thoughts, motives, and emotions. That could be like if you make a table with, four columns, and then you just do bullet points underneath. I mean, that is a great way to help you role play your character or to help a DM role play his or her NPC. Um, just a little index card, grid it off, and you say, okay, well, I would actually start probably with their thoughts and motives, then their emotions, and then how their emotions change and affect their behavior. But you could go about it in any way, and those I thought were really good categories. Yeah, so we got Freud, and there's the id, ego, superego. If you've never heard that one, I guess the slide here is drawing a parallel between um, this and a iceberg. Um, but um, let's see here. Um, I guess so. Your ego is what you think's right and fair and everything and good, and your id is just all about uh, avoiding displeasure and gaining pleasure. And then your super ego is how you manage that. I guess you would this little kind of ratio they have going here is another way of picturing alignment. Um, so I'm gonna skip a little bit down. The next thing that I thought was really cool. Well, this one, a trait, a characteristic of an individual describing a habitual way of behaving. Another way of framing it, but I liked it. This one I thought was very interesting. Okay, core personality traits, the big five. So you can, for each of these five, be more to one side. And this is a great way of summing up characters, in my opinion. So let's start with one. You have extroversion versus introversion. Is your character, social butterfly? Is your character, whatever the opposite of that is, a social caterpillar? um, you know, uh, they can be in the middle of the spectrum, but it is. I'd like to think of this as their charisma stat, right? Then you have neuroticism versus emotional stability. I would, uh, this one not vary too much. If like the extremes of this, like you don't want a completely neurotic character, but add some elements of that into some character to make them have flaws. Any one of these, if you invert them to the, I guess, more negative side of the coin, could be a great um, weakness or flaw in a character. And having that weakness or flaw is what helps the audience, which in this case is the imagined audience, but as well as your players who are seeing their characters do this stuff, but also they're seeing this story unfold in front of them as well. They want to be able to root for characters, and if you want them to root for a character, you need to give them a weakness as well as strengths. So that one, number three, agreeableness versus antagonism. I mean, this is kind of like your domineering personality, or your, I guess, go along, get along type of guy. Um, that'd be good to play around with as well. Uh, then we have um, conscientious, conscientiousness versus impulsiveness. Now that is quite a word. I would just say, are you methodical, plan things ahead, or are you impulsive? Um, uh, I mean, having an impulsive NPC is one of the most fun things because, as a DM, because it kind of throws that variable in there so that the players can't really say, "Oh, is that NPC is just here to guide us to the adventure." Well, what if the NPC is trying to do that, but is also very impulsive and gets off on tangents, and they have to kind of be like, okay, no, this guy maybe is unreliable." And five, openness versus resistance to new experience. Um, I mean, that one's self-explanatory. Hopefully, as a player character, you want to be pretty open. Maybe not like I would see clerics as probably the least open to change, and paladins, whereas maybe bards, rogues, the most open to change because their whole life is about change. Their whole life is, I don't know where my next meal is coming from. I have to either steal it or hope that I get a good crowd at the tavern and make enough coin. Um, and uh, these I thought were just really interesting personality traits, and I definitely connected it to D&D and play around with these. See what your character can come up with. Really quick too, I want to touch on what is this? These are defense mechanisms, and I guess so. Whenever your character or whenever a person is confronted with stuff that they don't like, they deal with it with some defense mechanisms, and obviously these all apply to real life, but for D&D purposes, use these sparingly. But I think these could be great for the motor, the engine behind a quest. If you're from the DM side, or something that your character needs to work through it on a long-term character arc, right? So repression is, you don't like a thought that is persistent, or like if you're a cleric for this one god and you are very keen on smiting the unholy in the name of the righteous, and maybe there's some kind of deep down some feelings of that you like killing these living things, and that it's fun to you, but those thoughts are scary, those motives are scary, so you repress them. If that's from a player side, uh, repression could be a good thing to play around with from an NPC standpoint as well. I could see like a king, um, or some sort of leader having kind of repressed ideas about, like they think they're doing good, but they might not really have the best interests of the people at heart. Regression, returning to earlier stage of development. I mean, that's a coping type of mechanism, I guess. Maybe, I can't really imagine where that would come into D&D, although I'm sure you could find some place. Displacement, the transfer of unacceptable impulses away from their original objects onto safer or less threatening objects. So, like, um, people do this, like my professor's talking about, like with pets a lot. They will displace an emotion they're feeling onto their pet and say, "Oh, I think my dog is feeling this way." Um, uh, Interesting. Not sure if it really connects to D&D that much. Denial definitely does, though. Denial, refusal to recognize threatening impulse or desire. Um, Denial is a very fun one to play around with. A character that's just clearly in denial. A bard who's in denial about how terrible their singing voice is. A uh, a warrior who's wounded and is in denial that he can't fight as well as he used to. Um, you know, There's a lot of good things you can play around with that defense mechanism. Um, Reaction formation, I guess. I mean, that's self-explanatory. That might be you, how an antagonist reacts, right? Uh, like if you're gonna turn a character in the end to be bad, and at first he seems good, but he doesn't know that he's gonna be, he's not intentionally being deceitful, but he has these true wishes or desires, but he's behaving in the opposite way to keep them repressed because he's not fully aware of them yet. That might be a good thing. Rationalization, obviously, every antagonist you make should have a rationalization. Um, and I'm talking big antagonists, not your bloodthirsty gnolls, you know, uh, demons and stuff, just uh, that are just sadists. Rationalization is super important for a cool villain that you get. Think of any big villain from movies. Think of the Joker and his rationalization of, basically society is the one that's messed up, and I'm just showing them how it's messed up. Or, think of what's another good one. Um, Dang, I don't know. I can't think of any like famous antagonists right now. That's weird. But rationalization, the use of self-justification to explain away unacceptable behavior. So your villain needs to be doing unacceptable behavior, and they need to have a self-justification for that. And if that self-justification ties in to their backstory, ties into, like we talked about before, behaviors, thoughts, motives, emotions, oh, that's a powerful character, right? And because you don't want a guy who rationalizes it with something that doesn't make sense to his character, right? Like a Death Knight type character, and he's like, well, I don't kill children, so I'm okay. And I mean, that's like, I guess, a rationalization, but it's really weak sauce. It would be cooler if, he had some tragic backstory and you know was out to kill everyone who had wronged him, but then at a certain point he got done with all the people who had wronged him and kept on killing, something like that. I don't know. Projection, imposing one's impulses or wishes onto another person. Again, great trait for a villain. Sublimation, the channeling of unacceptable impulses into socially constructive pursuits. I don't know sublimation. I don't. Probably should have studied this a little more. But yeah, that one I'm not sure really connects to D&D. Anyway, that is just some psychology, random bits about personality, and I thought they connected to Dungeons and Dragons. Thought it might be interesting. This is G3 signing off late at night. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.